In a new policy, what owners can or cannot do with their vintage vehicles. Rather than only regulating vintage cars and two wheelers with strict do's and don'ts, the policy seeks also to enshrine the freedom and passion of owners of such vehicles. India will usher in a new regime for vintage motor vehicles soon through a new policy intervention. Rather than only regulating vintage cars and two wheelers with strict do's and don'ts, the policy seeks also to enshrine the freedom and passion of owners of such vehicles, which represents a bygone era frozen with their wheels, hood, and chassis. The government says the objective is to preserve and promote the heritage of old vehicles. What are vintage vehicles and how many are there in India? Currently, the Central Motor Vehicle Rules 1989 do not define what vintage vehicles are. The new policy will insert new clauses to bring a standard definition and how such vehicles cannot be used. The term will cover any vehicle 4 to 2 wheeler which is more than 50 years old from the date of first registration after first sale, including any vehicle imported into India. This will be subject to the condition that such vehicle should be maintained in its original form and should not have undergone any substantial overhaul that includes any modification in chassis or body shell and or engine. Enthusiast estimates the number of heritage vehicles at around 5,000 across India. What will the policy allow? It seeks to maintain that such vehicles cannot be used for commercial purposes or put to regular use. This means you cannot use your vintage vehicle to say commute to work. Other than that, the owners can use their vintage cars in any way wish, such as exhibition or a ride from time to time. How did it come about? In November 2020, the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways released a draft notification for public comments and objections on a proposed vintage vehicle policy. It sought to bring in a strict regime of regulation like setting up committees of state and union territory level officers to decide what is vintage and what it is not. It also proposed far-reaching restrictions for use. For example, as per the draft, these vehicles could only be used for a demonstration, technical research, refueling and maintenance, exhibition, vintage rallies and traveling to and back from such exhibition rallies. After deliberation with all stakeholders, especially heritage vehicle enthusiasts and owners, the new policy does away with such restriction and actually emphasizes that the vehicles can be used but not regularly for commercial purposes. This allows vintage enthusiasts to indulge in their passion without running afoul of any laws. How to register these vehicles? Old vehicles already carry the registration numbers which will continue for new ones like imported vintage vehicles or old Indian cars over 50 years old seeking to enter the vintage category. A new numbering system will come into effect. These vehicles will carry a registration plate displaying the state code in two letters followed by VA for vintage, then a two-letter series and finally a four-digit series between 001 to 49 allotted by the state registration authority. Registration information will be on the Parivahan portal of the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways. New vintage vehicles can be registered for Rs 20,000. E-registration renewal will cost Rs 5,000. Every application for registration will have to be accompanied by a policy of insurance appropriate fee, bill of entry in case of imported vintage motor vehicles and old registration certificate in case of vehicle already registered in India. The registration certificate will be valid for 10 years, renewable thereafter. Sale and purchase of vehicles registered as per vintage is permissible. The buyer and seller have to inform the respective state transport authorities. Will the upcoming vehicle scrappage policy apply to these vehicles? No. Vintage vehicles are insulated from the scrappage policy. If a vehicle is more than 15 years old but within 50 years, the owner can continue to keep it by bypassing fitness test every 5 years. How are vintage vehicles treated internationally? Internationally, the term classic is used to describe any car that is about 2 decades old. In the UK, cars more than 40 years old are vintage. All such vehicles are exempted from paying the annual road tax. vehicle excise duty and also exempt from annual UK safety test. In the US, the rules of defining the classics vary as per states, but typically the Antique Automobile Club of America says motorized vehicles 25 years old or older which were built in factories specifically designed and manufactured for transportation use on public roadways and highways are eligible to be called classic. Thank you.